with the story. So these are the laws that govern behavioral health, usually are the Knox-Keene Act and the Mental Health Parity Act. Those are federal statutes that then disseminate down to each state. And then in the schools, you're looking at the American Disability Act, IDEA, the Individuals Education Act, and then Section 504, which falls under those, and different particular laws. And then the regional centers, the Health and Human Services Department of Consumer Affairs. And then this is how we track each of our patients or your children, for those that most people watching are parents, right? And even doctors, like when you come into here, they don't know about all this stuff, which is why it's so important we unite, and people like you, doctor, that are here, and other doctors that we work with, and lawyers, you know, bringing in all these big legal firms now that are kind of like waking up to this health crisis. Not just the glyphosate attorneys that are involved, but Robert F. Kennedy Jr. with the Children's Health, and our lawyers on the back end that are working on a bunch of different things. So that's where we kind of left off. So then I'll let you ask your questions as we carry on the timeline.
So what happened? So did they deny you?
Yes.
Denied what exactly, and then what did you do after that?
Okay, so his question, if you can't hear him, is did they deny me, and then what were my steps after? Okay, so yes, everybody denied Dominic, my son, who just turned 18, and you guys all, some of you watched my gag orders that have been placed on me for years have lifted. So he was denied by Kaiser. So then what we did is, his dad being LAPD, this is where Los Angeles Police Department and their public corruption comes in, that we want the people to start to know about, is they have their own, they take federal dollars through what's called the Los Angeles Police Relief Association, and people buy their own health insurance policies. So we switched from Kaiser to Anthem Blue Cross. So this is our story, Anthem Blue Cross. Other people watching are going to have different stories, like United Pacific Health. You know, you guys take insurance. So Cigna, United Pacific Health, Kaiser now has a PPO plan. You know, so it depends on if you're a PPO plan or a HMO plan. So for us, they denied Dominic through Anthem Blue Cross, and then I had discovered the fraud and the public corruption between the LAPRAC union, the Los Angeles Police Department, and we kept reaching out to them as mom. I keep just saying, like, help my son. And of course, it's the denials, the lies, the hemming and hawing. So I just always ask for public record or anything that I'm entitled to under my, okay. Something was ringing in my ear, sorry.
Yeah, that's my phone.
Okay, cool. So I'll start back. Did it delay a little bit when it rang?
The entire connection is messed up. Everybody dropped off because the connection is absolutely horrible. I don't know what happened, but last
Okay, cool.
But go ahead. It's still recording, it says.
Okay, awesome. So anyway, Anthem Blue Cross is who, so we sued Anthem Blue Cross on behalf of my son, and then it turned into a class action lawsuit against the entire big insurance giant, Anthem Blue Cross. So it wasn't just LAPD, because there were a bunch of LAPD children. It wasn't just my son. I obviously, for confidentiality reasons, can't say their names, but I can, of course, talk about my own son. The only thing in the clause now is I can't talk about the amount Dominic received, but I can talk about those lawsuits. So yes, they all denied him. We sued them. The lawsuit, I started infiltrating as a mother, and then with my patients and students, their fax lines and their email lines and their phone lines, letting them know you guys are denying the children. At the same time, I was notifying the FBI, the CIA, Department of Justice, Attorney General. The Senate office, Governor Schwarzenegger was the governor at the time when the lawsuits were finally filed, and I basically was just a mom advocating. I mean, that was how my nickname became the Erin Brockovich of autism. And I just started infiltrating their phone lines and their faxes. And then this lawsuit didn't get settled on record until 2012. So lawsuits take a long time. And this was in civil law. So that's where he was denied. So in schools, catching you up to date on schools, last night, I haven't publicly announced it yet, but I did file one of many lawsuits to come against the school districts for claims for damages. So going back to Dominic in 2003, we were here, and I'm just gonna start to name out the people that are doing it, at least for my son, but remember, he represents hundreds of thousands of children in the state of California. I mean, millions around the United States this is happening to, this whole infrastructure of denial, services, discrimination, fraud, right? So here we are in Glendora, we're living here in 2003. They deny him. They deny you services, they give you some layman's IEP under these particular codes, they say that he's not going to benefit, that he's not going to progress, and so then they'll sometimes offer you services, and then even when they offer you services, they don't provide them. So we end up going through what's called due process complaints, DPCs. And so there's a whole team now of special education lawyers. So I can show you, like, here are civil lawyers that specialize in civil and tort claims.
Mm-hmm.
Here are sped ed lawyers. And there's hardly any that specialize in civil or tort, but they do exist. And then here, these lawyers are just, I don't even know what they're called because they're so hard to find. So when you get over to regional centers, they have, this is an individualized education plan. This is the individual pupil plan or person plan. I forget the actual acronym name. But these also outline what services and covered benefits that child is supposed to get. So they were denying Dominic too. They all basically, it's a rat race. They all point fingers at each other and say, oh, this person's supposed to provide it. Oh, this person's, and they all damn well know they're lying. They're all supposed to provide it. This one is considered the last payer, like last resource of payment. But if these guys are denying, they were supposed to pay and then they wouldn't pay. So it forced us to go and sue these guys.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So out of this particular thing with my own son, our patients and students, we settled a very large amount of money and we wrote SB 946. So a whole task force was developed around SB 946, which is our hope now, is to get more task force going, because we need to expose. These guys are kind of off the hook now once we wrote SB 946, because they're just considered the last payer. And now it's really looking at these two guys, the behavioral health side of all of our insurance. You've got you over here with the medical doctors, but the schools are the ones that are really the big, I think, the bad boys out of all of it. And how our strategy, I'm not going to obviously publicly announce our strategy because we have them, but I can certainly explain what they're doing to our children is very analogous to what the insurance giants do to us, this unlawful denials. And the even scarier part is these are government officials. So these are state actors. They're people that are taking our tax dollars. They're all paid for by us, and they're government officials, and a lot of them elected. Like last night I was at the board meeting, and they're all elected, right? So they're now, interestingly enough, subjected to a new set of laws, and they know that they're subjected to it. They're just been sitting around because nobody's been holding them accountable to it. So this is where we come in, and I, as mom, I just keep alleging my child is a victim of abuse, medical neglect, educational neglect, physical abuse. When you're, these kids a lot of times are getting physically abused. If you pull up public record at California Department of Education, families will be disgusted at the amount of settlements that you see from school districts doing wrong to children. And we're just like this amount. We're so little. We're only the families that are educated and aware. And so can you imagine if all of us band together and we get to the next step with all this? Because these people absolutely know what they're doing. They're no different than when we get into vaccine injury conversations of like, we know it's causing inflammation, we know it's causing viral, bacterial, and toxic damage to the body, the human body and infrastructure. They're the same. They know that they're hurting our children. They know that they're ignoring their mandated reporting requirements. They know that they're taking federal dollars and our state tax dollars and intentionally not providing these services to children and then waiting for us to sue them. When we were in Dominic's last settlement agreement, which the school district is still violating today, they're out of compliance even on a settlement agreement. The lawyers talk about our children as lemon laws. So my precious son is talked about like a lemon law. So even though you make crappy cars and we know that there's lemon law exists, it's only the people that get lawyers that are willing to take the lemon law and file a complaint against those car manufacturers. It's the same game they play with our children in IEPs, which was why our nonprofit heavily focuses on that. So
what has happened since...
That's a huge mouthful, but
yeah.
So I'll erase all this.
So what has happened since then?
Okay.
So you got the settlements on the behavioral side of things and all that stuff, and what has happened to you since then?
Okay.
Speak up, Russ, because I don't know if they can hear you either.
I'll repeat it. So you asked
just
what's happened
to you since then, and
then.
why? I mean, from this has been going on, why did the craziness even more so increase for everything? Like what happened?
Yeah, that's a complicated question of why it happened, because I mean, it's like if a car accident happens outside and you line up 5 people, they're going to each have a perspective to it, but ultimately they'll all agree on one story, right, about whose fault it was. Well, in my case, there was a lot of people's faults on who did what to me. So his question, and I'll repeat it again, is since all of that, because that's really when a lot of it started in 2012. So here we are settling all these lawsuits and whatnot. And then all of a sudden, my personal life, me as mother, so we're getting now into like medical kidnapping and what happened with me. So in 2012, during the lawsuit settlements, I had started a school. So that comes into that middle section of IEPs. So not only was I suing Anthem Blue Cross, we had something called a non-public school and a non-public agency. This is important because there's very few that exist around town, but they're impacted and they're inundated. And I think this is one of the biggest problems when we look at legalities of what's happening in the California Department of Education. But so I owned one. I started out as a for-profit. When crazy stuff started to happen, the clinic started getting broken into, child abuse reports while I was still married to the LAPD officer anonymously were always getting filed against me, saying I wasn't caring for Dominic because his autism, he was running up the street naked, you know, just doing autistic things. Found sleeping on floors because he liked to rewind and fast forward, so he would find video stores and try to break into them to get videos to rewind and fast forward. So all these crazy stuff started to happen even when I was married to the LAPD officer. And so I own these. I converted them intentionally over to nonprofit, not only to protect myself, but hopefully to protect my children, to protect our patients and students. And I don't know what happened, because at least to date, it's been really, really sad of everything that's happened. So in 2012, we became a 501c3, and I wanted to make it known through those particular laws what was happening so people could see the funding coming in, because all of the funding were results of lawsuits. And I was using my own money. So I had inherited $500,000 from my grandmother, and I had put it into the nonprofit to try and balance out. We were going bankrupt because Anthem Blue Cross was denying us the payments, the school districts were denying us the payments, and regional centers were denying us the payments. So this is a common game you see even in medical practices too, is the billing fraud, right? So these companies, these big giants, whoever your contract holders are, won't pay you, and they'll hope that you'll go bankrupt, so you just go away. And then they only have these contracts, it's a monopoly, like a game that they'll pay the people that do what they want, deny the services, tell them to go away, very limited treatment, low expensive cost treatment, right? So in 2012, I decide that I'm going to convert to a nonprofit. I'm going to try and keep myself safe because I want to leave my husband at the time. We had had a horrible personal relationship on the back end. There was lots of issues. Him being a cop, he was in trouble at LAPD. It's all record. LAPD Internal Affairs has interviewed me, the FBI, Homeland Security, CIA, Department of Justice. I mean, the list goes on and on about these people that come in, and they just kept writing me off as crazy. That's like gaslighting is very common of what you do. Is I started exposing the domestic violence within our relationship, the fact that he was caught on duty at LAPD, misconduct on duty, lying on duty. There were allegations that he was having an affair, that him and his partner were having sex in hotel rooms while on duty. So what you see in movies about LAPD officers, this was the life on the back end I was living while I'm trying to help my son and my children have healthy, happy, justice served. But it was my own personal strife. I was one woman. We had over the capacity of the professional history of Hope Inc. Academy, because a lot of people want to understand the history of our nonprofit and where we're at, is 312 employees. So we had school teachers, licensed therapists, social workers, marriage and family therapists, behavior analysts, I don't know if I said credentialed teachers, speech and language pathologists, physical therapists, doctors from USC. The list went on and on. Anything that treats children with mental health issues, they worked for our nonprofit, and they were contracted in. So they all knew what was happening. So they started to also fax and email the FBI and CIA and saying, hey, all of these children in our company are victims of fraud, racketeering, intentional color of law abuse. The director, Jamie, this is happening to her. Like, is anybody going to help us? No, they didn't care. They don't respond.
Right.
So I called 911 in 2014 for a domestic violence call. And long story short, I was taken in on a 5150 hold, and I was labeled bipolar schizophrenic paranoid by a psychiatrist at a hospital down here. We are in civil lawsuits with a lot of these guys, so I can't talk a lot about that.
Yeah, that's fine.
But the bigger vision story is what happens to a lot of people. You're either captured, you're tortured, you're killed, you're accused of doing something that you didn't do. And so for me, the bottom line was from 2014 to 2016, I lived a nightmare of doctors labeling me things I wasn't. I had been prescribed, I'm not sure, I have to look if it was 32 or 34 drugs, psychoactive drugs. I was given Haldol, I was strapped to beds. My children were taken away from me. I was accused of a potential threat to them. And that's basically, they listened to the cop. I mean, he sat back with his gun and his badge, and the guys that were all in the police departments that all knew who I was in the area because we had contracts. I just watched it all happen before my eyes. Is them accusing me of being, it's in the paperwork, it's all documented that I was paranoid schizophrenic. And I kept screaming, how do you go from being me to that? None of it made any sense. Nobody would listen. And I legit went crazy. Like, I was on tons of medications. And so for me, the only thing I had was, and I talked about this in one of the last interviews, and my attorneys know, is like, the pen is mightier than the sword. So I documented everything. I sent out blast emails. I put cameras in my home and tape recorded everything. When I was inside of hospitals and I would come to, I would write notes about, I'm a whistleblower. I'm traumatized. This is what I've done. My son's the largest settlement holder in U.S. history. Like, for fraud, for people like you. Well, that would just get me in trouble in these hospitals. They'd Haldol me, they'd restrain me, they wouldn't let me out. And that's what I did, is I documented everything. And then in 2016, we talked a little bit about that. And we're not sure necessarily how public to go with that, but the truth is, when people are on psychoactive medications, they make decisions they don't know that they're making, or you're blacked out. I was blacked out. I can't count how many times I was blacked out, no consciousness, from medications, doing things, saying things. Apparently, I, in those times, really liked my emails. So there's record of all of it to very high-ranking officials within the military, USC, Berkeley, Stanford, Harvard. So I would be emailing major people that were within major universities and government entities, senators, congressmen, you name it.
Documentation.
Yeah, I was documenting
huge.
it. Yeah.
But so many of these mothers that we see, obviously, nowadays are so frazzled and so rattled, and that's what, obviously that's what they want, is to get you in a state of not knowing what to do, and but you still maintained that level of, well, hey, you
I'm alive, I'm standing as well. People always, I think you asked me last time, we were like, is your brain okay?
No, I think I was asking that about myself. Your brain is fantastic.
Thanks.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's a whole other...
Yeah, no, that's cleared up a lot of questions. I just wanted to know, when did it all happen, how did the craziness start, and then just the timeline of the events. So,
yeah. That's pretty much the timeline, and if I could say a couple more things, just because we're documenting it. And you saw me at the board meeting. I don't care about money. I don't care about how many viewers I have. My sole drive, like most of us when we wake up, if you don't have children, you're doing it for the right reasons, for humanitarian purposes. For me, I do this for my children. I'll die one day. They'll all die one day. I get to go to bed every night knowing I try to do my best, and I just want what's just and what's ethical. So in having said that, the interesting part is the California Department of Education, they tell people, like my son's principal at his school last week when they called the police on me, they called the police and they denied me taking Dominic, even though he's 18 now. the interesting thing is I cease services. They tell everybody that the state shut me down, and sometimes I'll, in passing say the state shut me down or whatever, but that needs like a particular amount of clarity. So what happens is they intentionally do this kind of stuff to shut you down, right? They want to, child abuse charges, mental health charges, fraudulent charges, whatever these charges are, to either bankrupt you financially or make you go crazy, or whatever it is that happens, is that in that regard they shut you down. But what's interesting about my paperwork is, with my keeping very diligent records, is I notified them that Hope Inc. Academy needed to cease providing services because of confidentiality, and I, as a licensed clinician and credentialed school teacher at the time, needed to uphold the ethics and the legalities within my license, so I could no longer keep our patient records and our student files safe. And the fact that the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Justice, and the California Department of Ed, and Anthem Blue Cross, and all of our contract holders that damn well knew who I was, they were not keeping the children safe. That I was doing anything and everything within my power to keep our records safe, to provide quality and ethics-based services, because I was upholding the mission statement of Hope Inc. Academy, that therefore I had to cease services and try and get myself psychiatric help. And I could no longer do that. So we offered for somebody else to come in and take over the nonprofit and see if they could do it. Nobody wanted to do it. No MD, no clinician, no behavior analyst, no teacher. Everybody, they scared everybody away. So that's the interesting part, because in a court of law, whether it ends up in a criminal court or a civil court, because those people need to be held accountable, all of these little details are very important for families and for judges to ultimately hear. So that was just like an interesting side thing. The other legality thing is these people are still responsible. See, when you're a contract holder, the school districts, SELPAs, insurance companies, regional centers, it's actually their client. I was just a subcontractor. Hope Inc. Academy and Hope Inc. Institute, we were their subcontractors. So I was doing everything legal and ethical. They were the ones that weren't. And that's what's interesting about the law, is it ultimately falls on them. So what we're sitting on right now for the world to know, and I told them last night at the board, I don't know what will happen. We could maybe lose. They're the ones, they're abusing children. This is outright child abuse, medical and financial abuse. So it's that, and psychological. So those three kind of gray areas of the law when it comes to child abuse: financial, medical, and psychological, emotional abuse. It's kind of that like hard to prove gray area. I think I've done a good enough job keeping enough data to prove that this is exactly what's been happening and what's been going on, and somebody needs to be held accountable. It needs to be fixed. Not just for my son, but for everybody's children in not only the state of California, but in the United States in general. And the frustrating part is we have the solution. We know how to fix all this stuff. The fact that you don't want the solution, the fact that the Department of Justice and Homeland Security, like, come on, people. We know you're watching. When I was in criminal court, it all came out. They were showing, my Facebook Live. I know that they watch. They had print screen pictures of me, the Attorney General's office. They had the Jenny McCarthy and the #MeToo picture of said no mother.
Right.
They had all of that stuff printed out, and we're trying to submit it into evidence, saying things like, I knew what I was doing, you can't use psychoactive drugs, or what the police and the schools did as an excuse. Like, so we know they're all watching. So what are you going to do something about it? Right? So I don't know. Do you have any other questions?
No, that's basically exactly what I wanted to break down. Perfect.
Cool. Yeah. So, and then if I could share before we finish too, is one of the things that we want to do is in uniting the people. I made that post for you guys because I love it. It's like we're all, if you put it all together, like we're trying to bring hope, and hope for autism, and hope for ADHD. You guys uniting the people. Rescuing a generation of children. Let's talk about carrying autism now. Okay, learn the risk. Our vaccine's really safe.
Right.
Like all of these things, like stop mandatory vaccination. we can streamline those all together in one long sentence. That's what we're all doing, right? We're here, we're trying to do what's best for the next generation, and we're sitting on so much data. It's us all working together to introduce that data and to show Department of Justice. I mean, for once in our lives, at least mine as a mother and as a professional in the last 20 years, to have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. behind us, and then these bigger lawyers on the glyphosate issue, and then the Physicians for Informed Consent. This is the first time in my personal and professional life I feel like we have hope. Like, something is going to ultimately happen, and if not, in 50 years, just like Martin Luther King, or just like Rosa Parks, or just like all these other movements that we've had on women's rights or civil rights or gay, and whatever the movement is, right? I'm hopeful that we're going to look back maybe in 10 years, because that would be nice, maybe in 50 years, because that wouldn't be as nice, but we'll still take that win, right? That we're in a position now where we should all be uniting. We should all be working together with that data.
So I have a question on what you just said. So
Sure.
I feel like we're at a tipping point. You know, I mean, look, we can't even maintain a connection. I've got full Verizon bars. I'm using a hotspot, my own hotspot, and it's just not working for us. There's a tipping point. What do you think that's going to be? Because obviously the censorship is strong.
Yeah.
And you always say we need to exchange phone numbers because they will take this freedom of speech from us. They already have in their own way. What do you think the tipping point's going to be? What do you think is going to shove people enough to a point to where they're going to realize, wait a second, freedom of speech is gone now. When did that happen? You know, what do you think it's going to take for...
I think it's going to take us storming the streets. I mean, we were talking about this privately in some of our private groups with some very well-known folks in the media and the public attention, and women's movements, #MeToo, women are storming the streets.
Right.
When it was the Black and African American with Martin Luther King, they were storming the streets. The gay and lesbians, they had the gay pride, and they stormed the streets. Why in this health freedom movement, 54% of children are sick? We're not even just talking about the statistics of the pandemic autism we're calling, and it's actually a pandemic when you look at ADHD, right? I mean, autism is like 1 in 45 kids. ADHD is like 1 in 8, sometimes 1 in 4, depending on your environmental location. But uniting together, yeah, I think it is. I think it's going to be us continuing to have rallies, even if 50 people show up and it's still the same 50 people. I'm sure Martin Luther King went through that. It was Martin Luther King and some of their organizations, and ultimately it will grow. It doesn't take 2 years, it doesn't take 5 years, sometimes it takes 50 years.
The coverage of the media back then was so different than it is now. Right now they're picking and choosing and drowning us out. They're drowning us out as far as like the media goes. Back then the media was different. We got to see JFK, basically sacrifice his life for trying to be free, with what he was saying, and they killed him, what I mean? But now they're drowning us out. I mean, they're in full control, focusing on the silliest things, what they're broadcasting right now. And how do we gain access to the people if they're drowning us out? Do you have ideas for that?
Lyra, I asked the same question. You heard me yesterday on Lynette's Freedomizer show with Polly, Tommy, and Anu, and I asked the same question. What's it going to take? Because there's social media. Right now we're on Facebook, right? So even if it's censored, I mean, that video of me, I'm in a video, they stole a video of Larry Cook and I doing a video together, and it got 50 million views from that journalist, like AJ, whatever. Right. And here we do videos, and we're lucky sometimes if we get 500. Right now, because if you go on the back end and we actually put money and marketing into it, which we haven't done yet, because there's those secrets too. Like, I still think if you compare Martin Luther King days to now, I still think the media was controlled by newspapers. Then you just couldn't control the fact that Martin Luther King was shot in front of his hotel room. JFK was shot in front of the American people. So the newspapers back then, I think media has always been censored. Media has always been owned by the people with the big dollars. Right. So I think part of it is going to the people with the big dollars. Polly had a great point yesterday, is the churches. I really think that we need to start stepping outside of, at least for me, who's a mother of a child with severe vaccine injury and autism, for me, who's a mother that's experienced medical kidnapping, For me, that's been a professional that's experienced whistleblowing and public corruption. I know in the movement, I represent almost all avenues that we've all been talking about, that I'm that woman. And that's great, and I'm happy to keep, speaking up and whatnot. But I go to churches. See, on the back end, if you go on my Facebook, people don't realize I'm talking to the Catholic Church. I'll just tell you right now. There's people within the Catholic Church that care about our movement because aborted fetuses are in vaccines.
Right.
So Polly had a great point yesterday when she says that what we're doing now, like us in a room, here and talking, is great. But when we all fly into Atlanta next week, we will all be getting together and strategizing on the next steps. And I think those next steps are all of us, in addition to watching our Facebook lives and posting those comments, really uniting together with call to actions of sending an email to your church. Most of us go to church. Most of us have people that we associate with that aren't yet vaccine injured or aren't even cognizant of the vaccine injury, but they are aware of the glyphosate, and they are aware of GMOs, and they are aware of forced vaccinations, and that should concern people. You guys don't even have children yet, and you're here. You're not necessarily impacted by the movement, so you think, because you start waking people up, and they're like, oh crap, maybe I was vaccine injured. Like, I have massive inflammation of the fibromyalgia and the chronic fatigue and all of those things. I'm sure you have issues.
Well, pharma's ruined my family.
Yeah.
It took my grandparents.
Pharma ruins everybody.
Correct.
Yeah. So I think if we unite by pharma and expand the reach of vaccine injury, I think we're going to get further if we unite with our campaigns on having people that are caring, that are for the common good. I definitely think there's 700, according to CDE here in California, almost 1 million children on IEPs. We need to reach those people, the parents that have children with speech and language and ADHD and all these issues. And even if they don't want to hear our version of vaccines causing inflammation or damage to your immunological system, they will hear diet. They will hear that, hey, like glyphosate, GMO, sugar, corn syrup, those little planting of the seeds, no pun intended on the glyphosate, right. Is that maybe that they'll start to listen. And then once they know you, they like you, and they trust you, then you'll say, and hey, like, did you ever think about maybe the vaccines kind of could have played a role in this? There's all these different toxins in your vaccines. There's aborted fetuses, they're made on monkey jugulars and chick embryo, and if you're a vegan, like maybe the vegans are a little concerned because did you know that you're pumping this stuff through injections with live viruses and synthetic, diseases. So I think that is my long-winded answer of how it's being nice and kind and loving to each other.
And it's so hard to kind of come at people gently while at the same time having a sense of urgency for the fact that even Polly Tommy was talking yesterday about how there are institutions that are in place for vaccine injured adults now, right? That they're going to be fully medicated. Obviously, parents are afraid to die and to leave their children behind at the hands of the government, right? That they're going to basically, it looks like a nice place to live, but then they drug them out and put them at 4-point restraint, and that's what they're headed for. And so, in turn, parents are now going to suicide their children along with them so that they don't leave them behind. Not all of them, obviously, but some people are actually thinking about making that choice for their children.
Tons of parents I talk to talk about killing themselves and their children together. It is something horrible. That is very common in our field because of that reason. Now, just in addressing that, going to our churches and reaching out and trying to raise money, we all know how difficult that is.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that my professional and my maternal free speech rights is that I still think we need to work with the government.
Right.
And that's probably shocking to a lot of people because a lot of people think after everything I've been through and all the countless lawsuits, I'm still pro, let's work together. Right. Depending on what happens with my license in the Attorney General's office, and I still have my teaching credential. People, hello, like I have it. So I am part of California Department of Education. So I'm going to keep going to them and saying, let's work together. Let's work together. But at the same time, it's just like Martin Luther King. Hey, I'm a black man. Stop segregating us. Stop beating us. Stop killing us. Stop saying we're less than a subspecies. Let's work together. Right? So I still think that we have to work together. Last night when I went to the school council, that was the first time. I'm going to keep going back. The police department, I walk in there all the time. Hey, do you guys want to work together? Imagine the shooter of a school, right? Because that topic is super sensitive, right? Imagine the shooter of the school that survived. He gets off the psychotropic medications. He's a completely different person. And he comes back and he says, I'm so sorry for what I did to that school. I honestly didn't know what I was doing. I had chemicals in me being prescribed by a doctor. I was following doctor's orders and I did something horrific and I'm so sorry. Now he might even be still behind bars, right? Mm-hmm. But he could still go to the police officers and go to those schools and say, I want to help you. Let's prevent this from happening again. Don't you think it's that government's responsibility to say, okay, let's work on that? It's like the movie Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio when he committed all the financial fraud. After he got let out of the federal prison, he works for the federal government now and shows them how he did all the things that he did. That's who I am. I'm saying California Department of Education. I've literally talked to the head psychiatrist of Anthem Blue Cross, who we sued. And he testified in front of the jury. He got a severance package of $600,000 after our lawsuits. I called him and I said, I have the solution for Anthem Blue Cross. Does anybody want it? I'm willing to work with you guys. After Dominic's lawsuits, like that's the whole other thing we haven't talked about. Our children are smart and they're rehabilitatable. That's my own word, I made it up, but they can't be rehabilitated. You can rehabilitate these children. And I have patented technology that I've shown California Department of Education, I've shown Anthem Blue Cross, I've shown the regional center. You all know. They all know that our children are resilient and are capable, our moderate severe children, of communicating. But they've got boards like the Applied Behavioral Analysis Board, the ASHA, the Speech and Language Boards. They don't want you to know the technology that we have. They don't want you to understand that there are solutions to this, because guess what happens? Then we expose the fact that you guys have all known. It's like having the cure for cancer. Can you imagine you have the cure for cancer and you kept it to yourself? And then in addition to that, the people with cancer, you denied and you provide them crappy services and let them die? That's pretty much what's happening.
I know what's going on. Yeah, I was like, that's already happening.
And so, sounding the alarm and screaming and hollering, which I've tried for years, that's not going to work. I'm just going to keep going to them, regional center school districts, and insurance companies, and say, hey, we have the solution. Like, does anybody want to work together? And I might die with nobody taking me up on the offer. I might succeed. You never know. So, anyway. Thanks, guys.
All right. Well, thank you,
we were
Jen.
live sometimes, but I just started talking to you.
That's ruined, but we're recording it, so
what happened?
People are.
You're
being shadowed down, pretty much is what's going on. The algorithm. Yeah,
Oh.
so that's ruined, but I made a post that we're going to go ahead and upload it.
Okay, cool.
Because he did record it. Is there anything else you want to say, touch on?
No.
Alrighty.
Oh, thanks,
Russell,
guys.
you have any more questions?
Peace, hope, freedom.
All right. Peace.